Hi, I'm Ben Folds. Today on the ArtsVote 2020 podcast series on arts and politics, Senator Mark Begich and I talked to presidential candidate Governor John Hickenlooper of Colorado. Governor Hickenlooper is a passionate advocate for the arts, and he shares his own personal musical talents. We also learn why, as mayor of Denver and governor of Colorado, he invested heavily in the arts at the state and local levels. But Governor Hickenlooper also tells us how, as president, he would show his national public leadership in the arts to support both public and private giving to the arts and arts education.
We are here with Governor Hickenlooper and Ben Folds, who is here on the campaign trail. I'm actually calling in from Alaska and moderating this, so we're very excited to have you here. And what I'd like to do is just maybe throw out a basic question, and that is, where do you see the role of arts, and not only as a presidential candidate, but you personally, how has it impacted you or your family or your roles that you've had as governor and mayor?
There's a framing that arts and cultural affairs plays in how we approach our economy, the civil nature of democracy, so many of the major issues. And, I come from the pro-arts side of things. One of the things when I got elected mayor in 2003, mayor of Denver, was we decided we were going to be a destination for young entrepreneurs. And then we sat down and scratched our heads and said, well, who are those entrepreneurs and how do you attract them? And, Richard Florida had just written The Rise of the Creative Class, and his argument, he came out and visited us, was that most of the really talented entrepreneurs and tech innovators were kind of social outcasts in high school. And they generally hung around with the musicians and the artists and the other people that were on the social periphery of kind of the popular group of people in any high school. And so his whole pitch was attract artists to your community and you will get the entrepreneurs and the tech innovators. So we did that. In Denver now, we provided these little incentives and recognitions. So Denver now has more live music venues than Austin or Nashville. We have 1,000 miles of bike trail, which is not really music, but is a form of music. And we celebrate visual arts and theatrical arts everywhere we could. And now expanded that when I became governor in 2010, we expanded that out to a statewide effort. And, for the last 3 years, we're the number one economy in the country. And I would argue that a big part of that is we have been a destination for young entrepreneurial, and it's not just tech innovators, it's all kinds of young entrepreneurs. They want to be where there's a culture of creativity.
It seemed to me everyone really, maybe there are exceptions, I haven't met them, but most people are interested and like and respond to art of all kind. Really, I'd say after you've got the roof over your head and clean water and everyone's healthy, the next thing you turn your mind to is, what am I interested in? And that seems to be art a lot of times. So it does make a lot of sense that was effective. Do you know anyone, like in your business, not a name, but is there a type that you would consider not pro-arts? And what does that mean? Because everyone I know loves something, music or some kind of art as a human being.
Well, there's a title for those people. They're called curmudgeons.
Yeah.
I think the battle is really, there are an awful lot of people that love art or have a self-interest in art. When I first opened my first restaurant was a large brew pub called the Wine Coop Brewing Company. It's still in business in lower downtown Denver. And it was a big empty warehouse. And we didn't want to paint murals because people would get tired of them. But we wanted something vivid on the walls that people would talk about and remember. So we actually hired one of the local art gallery owners to come work for us 1/4 time and to be our curator. So Nice. He went to all the galleries, and we had rotating art on our walls that allowed us to really engage our restaurant customers on a regular basis. And one of the local writers referred to me as, it said, Hickenlooper, nearsighted and long of limb, which is really a polite way of calling someone a geek. I had thick glasses at the time. But anyway, he owns perhaps the only restaurant in America with its own art curator. And it really did add value, and it sent a statement to all of our customers that we thought that supporting the arts was an important part of what made our restaurant special.
Can I say, it sounds the theme is that art when applied smartly anyway, is good for business. It's an economic driver, is what you're saying.
Well, it's good for business, but it also creates, there's a word, what I call love of place. And I think that's at the heart of almost all economic development is people, when they care about a place, they'll invest and they'll put themselves into that investment. And topophilia is that word. That is love of place. And the arts has so much to do with how people feel about a place. So whether it's art hanging in a restaurant, based on all that work we did with the restaurants, I got invited to be on the board of the Denver Art Museum, which most people have to give like $25,000 a year or something. I did not do that. But I did create an organization called Culture House, spelled Haus, Culture House, to encourage young professionals to join the art museum. Like many cities, our art museum was aging. The average of membership, the average age was going up every year.
Yeah,
so we dramatically turned that around and recognized that having a really good art museum, or hopefully many art museums, creates that love of place, and that allows other economic activity and growth to kind of get created side by side.
As you ascend to the title of president, how do you balance it then? Because you're now representing, as president, you're representing everybody in so many tastes. And I find that as much as art is unifying, it also can represent our differences, because people are like, this is my art and my tribe, and the others say the same.
Right.
They art against each other in some cases. How, as president, can you effectively use the arts to work for us the way that we know that they can?
Well, I think the key there is that the arts generally, if properly applied, brings people together.
Right.
And it blurs the lines between one tribe and the other. And, we have this amazing outdoor facility, right? It's a natural amphitheater up in the foothills called Red Rocks. It holds about 10,000 people, and it's owned by the city of Denver. And when I got elected mayor in 2003, and I loved it, I went out there, as mayor, and they told me that they were going to do that year they were going to get to 33 concerts at Red Rocks. I said, 33? Why aren't you doing more? And they said, well, if we had more concerts, the average attendance would go down. People wouldn't get the same experience. And I said, what about Starbucks? They open another coffee house across the street,
right? And
the customer count goes up dramatically at the one that was already open, not to mention the new one. So we argued about it, but the mayor, Denver's a strong mayor form of government. And so that next year we did 42 concerts, and the next year we did 50. Now they're doing 150 concerts a year, and the average attendance is always going up.
I've played 3 of those.
Did you really?
Yeah.
It's so cool. I mean, isn't it the most beautiful place in the world?
Beautiful, one of my favorite places in the world to play.
Yeah,
magical.
One of my favorite bands is the Avett Brothers down from Concord, North Carolina.
Yep, they're from my area. Yep.
And the Avets come out, and I've gotten to know them now. And I always go out and have dinner with them, and they could get the same amount of money by playing 2 shows. They actually get more money from playing 2 shows at Fiddler's Green, in closer to the city,
right?
Not quite twice, but 70% more capacity than they would playing 3 shows at Red Rocks, and yet they still play Red Rocks just because it becomes a religious experience.
You made me think about it as you talk about the business, the economic model, and clearly you get the connection between the two. When you add arts, you create opportunity in business. Here's an issue that, as a president, you'd have to deal with, and that is what happens with funding. And the National Endowment for Arts, for example, established in 1965, its funding today is about $155 million, give or take. And if you kept up to inflation, you'd end up with about $350 million today. But, of course, it's not, and the National Endowment for the Arts is a small piece of the puzzle of the arts community's funding. I know Ben's talked about an idea of how maybe a president might look at this, and I'll throw it to him to give his idea because I think it's a great idea. But tell me your thoughts on that, and then maybe you could pitch out the idea that we've talked to presidential candidates about, and your thought on that. Ben?
Right. I mean, what I think we'd like to see is a simple index of $1 per head, $1 per capita, that everyone knows that $1 of their tax money goes to the arts. I think the NEA is like at 47 cents per person now?
Yeah, it's about 47 cents. If you did it today, you'd end up with about 340 million, give or take, and that is basically keeping pace with inflation. Your thoughts, Governor?
I think I would happily support that as long as you set your ground rules so you're not trying to use government to create the most provocative art, but the goal would be to create art that brought people together. And I know there are many in our party as Democrats who feel that that's a limitation of free speech and that government shouldn't be involved in those kinds of limitations. But I think this country is plenty divided, right? I'm running for president because I think we're in a crisis of division, right? I think Trump is fueling that, and probably worse. We're probably more divided now than any time since the Civil War, and I think art would be a tool that I would want to use to bring people together. And the Avett Brothers are a great example. Are they liberals or are they conservatives? Are they Republicans or they're Democrats? Who cares, right? They are good people and they create amazing music. But I think that if we're going to actually expand federal funding for the arts, which I think is a great idea, it should be in that purpose of bringing the country back together again. And we've all seen those examples where the art that gets funded actually divides us in ways that aren't constructive.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of it is that at this point, and this is where anyone who knows a lot about the NEA, I would love anyone in the room to kick in on this point. But for instance, one of the great things that I see as a touring musician is the revitalization of rural areas, little towns, especially in the Midwest and West, where you've got an old theater that has now gotten NEA attention. And if you look at it, not all the money came from the NEA. They came in and established that there was the need to refurbish an old theater where any art that you wanted could go in, and it was a good $8 of private investment to the $1 of federal investment. And I think that's a great start towards what you're talking about, because that's not investing in Robert Mapplethorpe, who was the photographer that really upset a lot of people with that.
One of the artists that upset a lot of people.
Yeah, that was a dramatic moment. But I don't think that represents what the NEA is, and I think most people ought to understand that the NEA is more of a road, as if you had a mall that everyone would like to go to, but the government needs to come in and build a road so that we can get to the mall and enjoy the private the private businesses that exist there. And maybe some of it is really educating the public that the NEA doesn't walk around saying this art is better than this and this art is better than this and investing in it. With the amount of money we put into it, we over the course of this podcast, the federal government will have paid for the NEA. It's 20 minutes of investment if we were investing equally across the entire year. So the rest of the year runs out the whole clock. No more money goes to the NEA, and I'm worried that people's misunderstanding of it, that it's that's some sort of commie organization that centers on deciding what art is best and what is not. That would be a good thing if that could happen.
Well, I think that the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which in 1997 I won the Award of Honor from the National Trust for restoring historic buildings in a number, in a dozen downtowns across the Midwest, and trying to create just what you're describing the NEA does, creating community, really. And we did that a little bit in Colorado. We would provide key funding, we called it anchor funding, for small towns with main streets to restore one of their historic buildings as a kind of a crown jewel and inspire other capital investment. So the NEA was going to go and say, all right, we're going to use this money for investing in the infrastructure that promotes the arts. I think you'd get rid of half of your opposition, or maybe all of your opposition.
Right. Well, maybe it's a good discussion to have. I mean, I think there are so few of us who really understand what the NEA does from a symbolic point of view. A citizen looks and sees that so little money is invested in arts, and arts is so important towards our economy and well-being that there's a true disconnect between those things. And to me, it's really important for the next generations for us to invest, even symbolically investing in the arts would seem to be good for morale.
Absolutely. And you would appreciate this, Ben. One of the things we've worked on in Colorado over the last few years, Isaac Slade just stepped down. He was our first chair. He and I were co-chairs. And now Wes Schultz, who's the lead singer for the Lumineers, is taking over. But we have a thing called Take Note Colorado. And Take Note is predicated upon the notion that Colorado will be the first state in America where any kid who wants to learn to play music, no matter their geography or their financial circumstances, but any kid who wants to learn to play music will have an instrument and a teacher. And it's been amazing. We've gotten all the musicians have done benefits, One Republic and the Lumineers and the Fray and Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats. I mean, all these bands want to be part of this because it's actually building their fan base to a certain extent.
Yes, yeah.
But it connects them with their fans in a really powerful way. And every study shows that kids that study music when they're in elementary school or middle school, they do better in math, they do better in languages, they are more successful students, they do better socially. I mean, one after another of these checkpoints. We've been able to get so much done in Colorado with Take Note Colorado by incentivizing private businesses to get on board and help provide the funding. So we raise these benefits. One or another of our bands will do a big concert. We'll get 5,000 people. We'll raise $1 million. But then we get 5x that or 4x that, $4 million over the course of the year from donations. That really allows us to provide teachers. And one of the great things is some of those teachers are musicians who haven't made it yet. So they need a side gig, right? They need to have some steady income, and $25 an hour or $35 an hour for teaching kids how to play music is not a bad alternative for some of them.
Let me take you a lead off of that if I can, Governor, and that is education is a big deal. You've spent in as your governorship as mayor. One of the issues is STEM education versus STEAM. And the difference is one simple thing, and you know this, I see by your smile, it's a simple thing, adding arts, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and you've kind of led into it. As president, give us kind of some thoughts around that of how you would address or deal with that to expand arts and part of that stream of education, especially K through 12, and how that would impact them.
So the types of activity that goes on in young people's brains as they're growing, their synapses are connecting, and their brains are developing, the activity when they're creating music or working on art is very similar to the kind of activity when they're trying to figure out numerical puzzles or basic math and language problems, right? When they're problem solving. And I think there's almost incontrovertible evidence that there's connections between how a brain matures and the kinds of activities you put that brain in front of, right? And that could be visual arts, that could be performing arts, that could be musical arts. I mean, go down the whole list. And the more we can figure out how to get more creative work, more A into the STEAM, the more successful our math programs, our engineering programs, our science programs, the more successful they'll be. And literally, I don't know a single scientist who disagrees with that. Not one. And I'm talking about, we've got several Nobel Prize winners, right, for various physics type or chemistry type awards, and they are the first ones to say that the arts are a crucial part of getting more successful scientists.
One of the themes I hear you hitting on is a place between the private sector and the government when it comes to both education now, because some of this the program you're talking about does involve people privately investing in it, which is, in my opinion, is one of the great things about our country. I mean, I've done a lot of touring in other countries, and I like to hear how their arts work. And while I think there are a lot of honorable other ways to do it, I kind of think that it is a great thing that we have been forced to combine the two. How do you balance that, yourself? If education is irrefutably better with the arts, what is the role of our government and our president, says this is a next step for you? What is the role to lead and balance that between, if it was all private money, then I think we all know it wouldn't all go to the right places, because it just doesn't work that way. But if it's all government, then that presents its own problems too. How do you see balancing these things?
Well, I think that first, I think our education system is pretty messed up.
Right.
And I think there's a fair argument to be made that our high schools haven't evolved to reflect how society has changed, how the needs of our education system have changed, and STEAM's a good example of this. I mean, mostly what our high schools now are doing is teaching kids how to memorize and regurgitate what they've memorized. And they're, in a funny way, our high schools are filters for the elite universities. Well, when you squint your eyes and recognize that 2/3 of our kids are never going to get a 4-year degree, and we've pulled back so much of the vocational training and the skills-based training for them, music and the arts becomes part of a way to keep kids engaged, right? 20% of our kids never finish high school, and they know that that's makes their life trajectory impossibly difficult. And they still don't finish high school. Another 20% finish high school, never take another class the rest of their lives. So that's 40% are so turned off by what we're teaching in high school. Well, if we had more music and the arts, if we had more things that people built with their hands, if we trained kids how to work collaboratively, how to problem solve, things like probability that most high school kids never get exposed to, kids would be more interested in coming to school. And music and the arts would be a perfect example of that kind of engagement tool that allows kids to hopefully begin a lifetime of learning, because the automation and artificial intelligence, that workplace displacement that's going to happen here, whether we like it or not, in the next 10 or 12 years, it's going to require that kids of all ages are going to have to continue learning all their lives. And, it's not just the arts, but the arts become a very powerful foundation to allow someone to learn for their entire lives.
See, I get a different story in every city that I play. I have what we call a little master class, which is fans that want to show up early. I bring a public school music teacher in, and we have a little town hall almost about what goes on there. And I've learned a lot, because from place to place, I find surprising differences. Some places are one poor lady with a hatchback from 1975, like a Pacer or something. She's driving broken instruments to 10 schools and just trying to keep up. Other places have incredible public school with a good smattering of music and arts from early on. It's not consistent. Do you know how consistent it has been in Colorado?
Well, take note, Colorado. Part of what we partnered with an organization I think they're out of New Jersey, called Little Kids Rock, and they're a nonprofit that promotes music everywhere, and they have been great at trying to make sure that when we provide musical instruments to school systems, school districts, that they don't disappear,
right.
They don't get broken, that they're there for each successive year to continue using. And I think that's a big part of spending dollars wisely. But I think also the ability of our business communities to recognize a need and take care of it has been underestimated. And to a certain extent, we haven't done a good enough job proving to our commercial businesses, hey, this is a serious issue. And our funding for education, I mean, we all know that in elementary school, middle school, a longer school day and a longer school year will dramatically balance out everyone's achievement. In other words, kids from low-income communities will do as well as kids from upper-middle-class communities. And yet somehow we haven't been able to fill in those gaps. And business would help.
And I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a musician, but maybe some leadership from the top, from the top of our government, the federal government, to say, actually, it is important, and we're going to invest more than just 20 minutes of our year towards something that's important. That maybe that has a role as well. It's hard to convince someone that something's important if you refuse to build a road to it.
Well, and it's funny, and I hate doing this because, I'm a child of the 60s. So I came in and believed that what the adults were doing was ruining this country. And I went to the first Earth Day and I marched on Washington. I did all that stuff. And, we wanted to change the educational system. But if you go back to what an elementary school day looked like in the 1960s, and I know it wasn't perfect everywhere. I get that. But we had physical fitness all across this country. Right? We had music. Almost every public school, not all of them, but almost every public school in America had music and visual arts, art class, as available to all students. You'd go twice a week or 3 times a week to an art class or a music class. You sing in a chorale.
You talk about the arts and how important it is, and like you said, in the 60s, it was all-encompassing. An interesting statistic, between 82 and 1986, if you gave money to a charitable organization, you could write it off. Then the law changed, and then it got even more restrictive under the Trump administration's new rule. And one of the ideas being kicked around is, why not make charitable contributions above the line, meaning that anyone who contributes can have it as a deduction, instead of just the super wealthy or people who itemize, but just across the board. You want to contribute, you get to write that off. Now, we know there's economics to that, but I'm just curious on the concept of that idea to get more people engaged, because when this happened in 82 to 86, contributions went up almost 14%. When the law changed, contributions dropped by about 5%.
And so from 82 to 86, they said you could deduct rather than you could actually...
They call it above the line. You know, you contribute, you get to write it off. But in 87, 86 tax law, huge tax law change back then, big modification. And then it pushed it down, and you had to itemize it. And now if you itemize, that's where it falls. If you don't itemize, you're not in the equation anymore.
You don't get any benefit, right?
No benefit.
I'd have to look at that. I mean, I'd want to go see exactly where that money went and what the social benefit was. Not all charities are born equal, and we want to make sure that these are things that are, you know, nonpartisan and really are like I think music and art that help all kids.
Now you got a little more information, so now it's something to think about. It's something that we hear about through the arts community as an important part of helping push people to give more. Now I have a fun question. So let's assume you have nothing to worry about in life. You don't have to worry about going to work. Who's the artist or someone that you would like to be like? Could be music, could be painting, could be authors, could be anything in the arts and culture. What would be that person? Think about that for a second. Tell me what your thought would be there.
Boy, that's a pretty wide open landscape. One of the great benefits about being a mayor and a governor is you get to hang out with musicians like Ben. And so, you know, I mean, I've gotten to play on the stage with Old Crow and with Bob Weir, the songwriter and singer for the Grateful Dead. You know, I'm not sure I could pick one artist out over another. You know, one of the Broadway musical Hamilton, their road show came to Denver last year, and I was lucky enough to go. I went to a little college in Connecticut called Wesleyan University that has a big world music program, big arts program, and Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator, one of the creators of Hamilton, and his creative partner Tommy Kail, who was the director, both went to Wesleyan. And so I got to meet Tommy Kail when he came to Denver. And part of Hamilton was they would go to 10 or 12 schools each road show and challenge those kids to give them a bunch of reading about the colonial characters, you know, the founding of the country and who the people were, and then challenge them to create a song or a performance that was about somebody other than Alexander Hamilton, but somebody else from those times. And then they have a competition. So they provided tickets. In Colorado, the theater was, I think, 2,600 people. And they got 260 people from each of these 10 high schools. And then they had a competition where everyone did their performances of these historic characters. And then they got the actual actors from Hamilton to come out and sit on the stage. And they took questions from all over the auditorium. And then the 2,600 kids from all these different high schools quieted down, sat in their seats. The actors went back and got into their costumes, and the kids got to see a free performance of Hamilton. And to me, watching the interface between education and really high art, I mean, just wonderful arts. I guess Broadway musicals, you can't call it high art.
I call that one high art.
It's pretty high art. But to see that there was more to it than just a business, than taking money and showing people a show, but there was a real connection with students and education and a real interface there was, I thought, really inspiring. So I guess I would hold that up as if we're going to toast an artist or an art form, that would be those Hamilton folks.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think we'll see you in the next Hamilton revival.
No, not likely. Not likely.
Well, let me say this. I know the American for the Arts Action Fund really appreciates you taking the time for this podcast. It's not often that we hear about the arts talked about in the presidential campaigns, but this is a chance for people who care about the arts, but also care about this country and the direction it's going, and hearing from people who are running like yourself. So thank you for taking the time and being here today for this great opportunity on the podcast. Have fun on the campaign trail.
I will do. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe today to the ArtsVote 2020 podcast series with Ben Folds on Anchor or any of your favorite podcast apps. Please go to artsactionfund.org/podcast for more info. That's artsactionfund.org/podcast. You'll get more info.